Hello, my name is Ainaa MAISARAH binti NORAZUAN. I am from class RAS 203 4E. My metric number is 2020 470302, and I will present a topic regarding thermal conductivity of isotopically controlled silicon nanostructure. The problem statement is to determine the impact of controlled isotope doping on the thermal conductivity on silicon Si by investigating experimentally and theoretically. Next, to determine the thermal conductivity of the layers by means of time-resolved X-ray scattering. The objective of this experiment is to determine the thermal conductivity of the different nanostructures of isotopically enriched silicon layers expeditiously grown on natural silicon substrate. Second, concomitant molecular dynamics calculations are performed to study the impact of the silicon isotope mass, isotope interface, and of the isotope layer ordering and thickness on the thermal conductivity. Research methodology of this experiment is divided by two: experimental and molecular dynamic simulation. For the experimental, is divided by four partition. First, sample preparation. 2. Heat transport measurements by time-resolved X-ray scattering. 3. Continuum theoretical simulation of heat transport. 4. Result and molecular dynamic simulation. First, simulation setup. Second, result. For the experimental, 1. Sample preparation. Silicon samples with different isotopically modulated layers were expeditiously grown by means of molecular beam epitaxy (MBE) and chemical vapor deposition (CVD) on 100 oriented silicon wafers of natural isotopic abundance. 20 undoped bilayer structure of 29 silicon per 28 silicon is sample 1, and 30 silicon per 28 silicon is sample 2 were grown by MBE on p-type substrates boron dope with a specific resistivity of 0.02 and until 4 ohm centimeter. Next, the thickness of each individual isotope layer is about 10 nanometer, resulting in a total thickness of about 400 nanometer for the entire layer structure. This figure illustrates the concentration of the isotope of the silicon isotopes versus depth of sample 1 and 2 respectively. Second, 2.2 heat transport measurements by time-resolved X-ray scattering. The thermal conductivity of the isotopically enriched epitaxial layers of sample 1, 2, and 5 is deduced from the cooling kinetics of the top metal layer in air after pulsed laser heating. This cooler behavior is affected by the thermal interface resistance and the thermal conductivity of the underlying material. The reference sample 3, 4, and 6 serve to determine the thermal interface resistance from the cooling behavior of the metal layer, since the thermal conductivity of natural silicon is well known. The cooling of the metal layer after pulsed layer heating was followed by measuring the AU, lattice contents with X-ray pulses as function of time. The inside of figure 2 shows two consecutive laser pulses with the variable time delay between laser and X-ray pulse and their corresponding corresponding pulse duration in practice, and integration over the scattering response of about 2000 consecutive pulses at fixed delay was performed to increase the signal to noise ratio. Figure 3 is illustrate the time resolved relative lattice expansion of the AU layers on top of sample 1, 2 and 5 in comparison. Next, continuum theoretical simulation of heat transport. The structure considered for modeling the heat transport consists of a top metal layer deposited on an expeditiously grown Si layer, silicon layer. Conceptually, the entire metal layer structure is considered as a homogeneous material with an effective heat conductivity. This effective value will serve to describe the potential of conductivity tailoring. The smaller size of the X-ray spot compared to the laser spot justify to assume a one-dimensional heat transport from the metal layer into the silicon sample. Next is molecular dynamics simulation. First, simulation setup. The simulation cell consists of 28 times 10 times 10 unit cells of silicon with a cell volume of 449 nm power of 3 to 22,400 atoms and a lattice constant of 5.431 A. Periodic boundary conditions are enforced in the x direction, cross-plane direction of the layered structure, and free boundary conditions in the y and z directions in plane direction of the layered structure. The figure in the right sketch of the simulation cell and the isotope modulation of the sample. An effective thermal conductivity lambda of the sample is calculated by means of Fourier's law from the added amount of energy per time step differential E over T, the cross-section area A of the sample, the resulting temperature difference T, and the distance x between heat source and the heat sink. The effective thermal conductivity calculated from that equation is affected by the temperature anomalized at the heat source and sinks. Next, for the interface between region with atomic mass 28 nm in atomic mass unit, it is given by 8 Tm is the temperature difference if all atoms have the same mass m. The scale slide m square root m, so that Tm square root m over 28 times by T. M equals to 28. The equation Rk equal negative 2T minus T, M equal to 28 minus Tm per differential E over dt times A is derived by assuming that the total thermal resistance is a sum of 3 terms. Next, this result and analysis. This table summarizes the thermal conductivity and the thermal boundary conductance that were determined from the pump and probe experiments with the isotope and reference sample 1 until 6. Within the experimental accuracy, this supports the enhancement of about 10% report in the literature for the thermal conductivity of pure 28 silicon compared to natural silicon. Since the preparation of Si isotope structure with different layer thickness, layer sequence and layer numbers by means of MBE and their subsequent analysis with TRXS is far and too laborious, and time-consuming, we perform molecular dynamic (MD) calculations to determine the impact of various kinds of isotopic modulate silicon layers on thermal conductivity. Next, the graph on the left is about the simulation result for the thermal conductivity of the pure 28S silicon system. Lambda 28 equal to 2.79 WMK is far below the experimental value for bulk silicon. The reason is that the boundary condition imply that we simulate a nanowire, not a bulk lattice. Here, a reduction of thermal conductivity due to size confidence is indeed expected. Next, the graph shows the straight line of Kapitza resistor calculated for the isotope layer structure shown in figure as function of the mass difference of the silicon atoms on the right and left side of the interface. The last graph illustrate an increase of the thermal resistivity with increasing number of interface for superiority periods equal to and greater than 1.09 nm. A linear increase is expected in case the thermal conductivity, the isotope superiority, is mainly given by serial connection of the interface resistance. Next, conclusion. The experimental and theoretical results of this work leads to the conclusion that the acoustic mismatch model and the Fourier heat conduction theory based on bulk material properties do not explain in satisfactory manners the effective thermal conductivity of isotopically modulated superlattice structures. The suggestion that the physical properties of the superlattice itself govern the thermal transport in such structures seems to be more convincing. That's all from me. Thank you for listening.